Hello and welcome everyone to Liam's Lyceum. I am your host, Liam, as always, or aka Hemvar. Um, and today I have a special video. I guess I'll briefly mention, actually, I got a haircut yesterday, so this is my first video with shorter hair. Mine was slightly shorter than Graham's up until last night. And yeah, but that's okay. It's shorter hair that time, I guess, for me at least. And today, the special video, though, is because I have two guests with me to talk about a, uh, um, a magazine, I guess, and a publication, just a publisher. And sense, I guess you guys do more than just the quarterly thing, right? Or you have a little bit with Contra Amatoris Mundi. But we're mostly going to talk about Old Moon, I assume, today. But Old Moon is a publisher doing cool things, actually. Honestly, as far as like aesthetic, and I think I would say like consistency of stories, probably my favorite like short story venue right now. And I've read most of them. I have all of them actually. They're all right here. But I have not quite finished 7, so I haven't gone to 8 yet. So been reading since issue 1. No, it's right here. And so, anyways, I'm very happy to have Julian and Graeme on. Very happy you guys wanted to come talk to me. But if you guys want to just introduce yourselves real quick, say what you do with the magazine, who you are. So we can start with Julian, I guess. So.
Well, wonderful. Hey, everyone. And also nice to meet you, on air officially, Liam. I've actually watched some of your videos, and it's really wonderful. And we were talking a wee bit about merch earlier, and you're definitely going to be receiving a mug, no doubt, for having that whole collection. Thank you. But so my name is Julian Derek Barona. I am one of the 2 original co-founders of Old Moon Quarterly. And so my role is more to sort of guide the ideas, the direction, the patronage, funding, and securing like the direction we move in, right? And ultimately saying, or if there's an unusual problem, like, well, we have 2 great images, which should we go with and why, right? For artistic stuff like that, I try to be the director in it. In terms of the submissions and the actual editorial work and the meat and potatoes of the work, though, that I leave to Mr. Wilcox for him to describe. But to sort of further explain what I do, it is as sort of like director or the founder. And the original idea, though, was to help authors, like, if I had to personally explain a reason why, I'll go into it later, but I'm a really big fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and maybe you are as well. But that's what I do for Old Moon. And so thank you for having me on the show.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I'm Graeme Wilcox. I am one of the editors for Old Moon. So I help with the submissions and with the copy editing and layout and formatting of the magazine itself as well. And my wife, Caitlin, also works in the magazine. She is here in the house with me, but we only have one headset and no actual microphone. So I got to be the face of Old Moon alongside Julian today, but know that Caitlin is here as well. She also does some of the editing, and she really helps with the art direction as well and helping us put together not only the images we use for like our promotional stuff, but also the way the images are laid out and selected for the magazine itself too. Yeah.
Very cool. And it's only really you 3, right? For Old Moon.
Yep. And our artists. That's about it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The artists and the writers, I guess, if you want to include
them too.
So yeah. So it's very small, which I guess makes sense. It's pretty typical, I'd say, for a lot of magazines. I don't know if that's typical for a magazine that's paying 8 cents a word. I really don't. I have no clue actually. But I think that is one of the cooler things as well, though, is that you guys actually have a professional rate for. I guess you could say it's a dark fantasy magazine, but sword and sorcery, right? And then there's not many out there, to be completely honest. So, which could be very appealing, I would say, to writers. I don't know if the readers care all that much, but writers definitely do. And so you kind of mentioned already, Julian, but then why Old Moon actually is what I would ask. Then if there's a lot of answers to that, besides, giving a place for stories, like why these types of stories, why this aesthetic?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very valid question. And in a way, I hope it doesn't disappoint you, but the answer is very simple. We really like to read them. And we were struggling to find, we had a couple of personal people we knew that were like, hey, I sent this in, but it was rejected. Or, I submitted this and then like, oh, well, it got rejected, but it's a good story. And I'm like, well, I think this is good enough to be published. I like it. I would publish it. And then we were like, let's publish it. That's actually where it came from. But I didn't just spring out of a hole in the ground. I do have some artistic background. So I play keyboard, electric keyboard, and electric guitar. And I have like a really crummy indie music band. And the last song I released is a rock song called Old Moon. And though I think I'm a better lyricist and a better conceptualist than I am musician, because is standing on their own, the poetry and the imagery and the meaning of them, that may have inspired a certain fellow quite close to us to start changing a little bit. He would have been an author anyways, but something about the way a song I made made him feel inspired him. And so then his literature inspired me. And it's a sort of spiral that hasn't stopped since then. And because we like the literature so much, we like the authors, we like the artists, and we like you. I've watched some videos on your channel. I subscribe to it, actually. I'm J Virus, right? Really, that's me, maybe a few months ago or half a year ago. And it just hasn't stopped since then. So we did the first one independently. It sold well enough. And I asked Graeme, I said, again, as the director of it, not knowing that much about authorship, I said, what would further the project? And he said, you know what would really matter to people and further the project? Paying professional rates. And I said, let's do it. And every single decision we've made actually has been in that way. For people like you, Liam, and for the readers, you're holding all 8 of them. I even like the way you held all 8. You're like, I like to touch them. And like, that's great, because we thought about that, really. And we have some mutant ones laying around that were like, this pulp sucks, toss it aside. And then, and here we are.
I like that. I mean, it's interesting that it's for, I mean, I guess you don't go into indie publishing to make a bunch of money, huh? Is that kind of one of those things? But so it's nice to see that. I mean, of course, you make some money, right? Make some money and make more stories and make more art, essentially, right? That is, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, like I have this venue, obviously, right? You know what I mean? And actually, I've got a couple paychecks from YouTube, which is very nice. But cool. I as a writer, though, which I don't need to talk about much, but as a writer, I would say, like, when I do sell stories, it's actually much more encouraging than when I just keep on getting rejections over and over again.
Sure.
Right? When I get the one acceptance, right, really pushes me to actually write more, rather than, just feeding off the rejection. That doesn't actually work that well for me, at least. So like, and so it's nice to see, like, it's nice to see these stories. And even, I mean, like, I don't want people to think that, like, we like reading these types of stories, and so we're just gonna, like, publish a bunch of, like, hacks and untalented people. These are really good stories. Like, yes. I've really enjoyed every single issue of that I've read. Very high quality. Like I said at the beginning, right? I think it's very consistent and good. I mean, like any like anthology magazine. I mean, not every story is amazing, at least to the reader, right? You know what I mean? But like,
yes,
very, very consistent, very good. But I also like that you mentioned the kind of playing off each other. I actually recently read like Peredur, the medieval romance, Welsh tied to the Mabinogion, right? And it's obviously, I mean, the one thing that's interesting about it, or there's lots actually, but one thing that's interesting about it is that it's almost certainly in response to Chrétien's Percival, where you're like, well, the Arthurian romances are Welsh in origin, so why is it responding to this French thing? Well, they're playing off each other, right? I mean, like, you have the French who are in response to the Welsh, and then the Welsh come back and respond to the French who are responding to their earlier stuff anyways, right? I mean, it turns out great. I mean, Peredur is great. Percival, even though it's incomplete, is great. So, and I think art works like that, just in general. I think it's nice that you acknowledge that, though, because I don't know how many. I mean, I've read plenty of fiction out there that's just like it's not responding really to much of anything, seemingly, right? Or maybe it's I've put it this way a couple times, where a lot of fiction is like more of like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy or whatever, and it's really doesn't read that great, essentially. Or, but I haven't experienced that in Old Moon. So
Sure.
maybe I'm talking too much.
No, not in the least. All the points that you bring up are valid. And I have a pretty good memory for it. I mean, profit isn't a dirty word, right? If you're doing it in a deceptive, if you're the copycat, if you're copy number 3, if you're in that evil conga line of copies, you're like, yeah, this kind of sucks, you know. Oh, look, a paycheck, awesome. But if you, I mean, you made a fresh story, right? To go to the next point, you make a fresh story and you make one sale. At the end of the day, you know, Mr. Hall, when you can close your eyes and imagine, do you see the 9 or 10 people that pass your stall and don't look at your book or don't or look at it and just like, no, like they emphatically are like, and I wouldn't buy it. And you're like, great. We went to a comic show and that happened. I'm like, whoa, if you don't want to buy it, fine. But like, don't like double not buy it. Just keep moving. Right. Or do you think of the one person that was like, I love it. Thank you. Who are you writing for? For the haters or the fans? And so I don't know how to deal with the haters other than multiply the fans. That's the way I handle it. And I've converted some of them simply with kindness and stoicism. Like any concern that an author higher or more above the situation we're in, they're going to have the same fears. What if my next book doesn't sell? Perhaps even Rowling has thought that. Look, she's tried to make 2 different novels since the Harry Potter series, and they've done okay, but they haven't taken off the same way. So, you know, but who's going to cry for her? But at the same time, she probably thinks, oh, I hope my idea takes off as well. How can she not think that? If she ever stops thinking that, what will happen? Right. And so at any level of analysis, I have no problem with people dissecting what Mr. Wilcox and I have done with Old Moon, because if anything, it's replication in different genres, or it's the copycat idea would only lead to more well-paid authors making stories that people that review and enjoy reading would like. So copyists all you want. You know, pick my brain. I don't mind at all. And as for how we find them, when you pay better rates and you're willing to have someone like Graeme, who will do open submissions for the world and review them one by one, perhaps, you know, that may be something you'd want to speak about is pretty cool. That's how we found the good authors. Langan and Laird Barron, they've been there for a while. Jane, you know, Mr. Ang and a few others, but Graeme has spoken to people like on forums where there's maybe 6 or 12 authors. And individually spoken to people. That's what he did. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, indeed. I kind of have lost track of what we were discussing.
Oh, well, I was discussing how he was concerned at first of his own work selling, and then secondly, if it's, you know, appropriate or okay to talk about certain things. But again, the meagerness or the smallness of it, right? The boldness of the project is part of it, because we have nothing to lose. We like these types of stories and would like to publish them. At the very least, we'd like to find authors. The process that we use to find the authors is actually, that's part of it. So if the backer kit does better, then we go to a higher rate, right? It spirals upward. That's obviously if, you know, a meteor hits me tomorrow and the planet or New York upstate's gone and Graham and I are gone, then there are 8 or 9 cool volumes. But if we continue, the idea would be to find more authors, to, you know, enchant more people that maybe wouldn't have given the genres a consideration, or they look at the aesthetic, at the very least an inexpensive stocking stuffer. I mean, goodness. And then lastly, maybe it inspires bigger names or different people. Like you said, it might attract a different name or author. And that to me is extremely exciting.
Sure. Well, you know, I suppose I can blather about certain things. So I think one thing, so Liam, you're talking about how Peridor was itself kind of a Welsh retelling of Chrétien's Percival, Story of the Grail. And I think, and this connection might be tenuous, but I'm going to pursue it anyways. I think part of why we wanted to make Old Moon, in addition just because we knew people who had stories that we thought were cool but weren't getting published, is that the world of publishing of magazines is pretty small, right? And I think that styles of stories that get published crystallize really around only a really small amount of editors and what they want to see, right? There's just, at any given time, there's probably no more than, you know, probably a dozen magazines that pay pro rates for like fantasy and science fiction, maybe less than that. And in terms of ones that play semi-pro or pay what we might think of as like an honorarium, something that might pay like, you know, a set fee per story. There's probably, you know, there's more than a dozen, but there's probably not much more than 2 dozen or perhaps even less. So it's just, there's a very small amount of venues out there, and every editor has pretty specific tastes. And so people write towards, I think, not all the time, not everyone, but a lot of people are going to write what they think is going to sell. And you're not necessarily selling when you're selling to a magazine. You're not necessarily selling to the public or to the people who are reading that magazine. You're really selling to the editor who wants to get people to read it, of course, but presumably, but you're selling to what their tastes are. And so you set up a magazine, you set up a market, and you get people who hopefully will read that and say, hey, that was really cool. I want to submit something that is a Beneath Cecil Sky story or a Clark's World story or a magazine of science fiction and fantasy story or fantasy and science fiction, whatever it may be. I want to sell to that market. And depending on who that editor is, that story is going to look a particular way. And you will get stories that end up doing that sort of Parador and Percival thing, where say you sell a story to Beneath Cecil Skies, or perhaps to use one that's a little bit closer to home, perhaps Tales from the Magician's Skull, the late great Howard Andrew Jones magazine that was until recently published by Goodman Games. Say somebody makes, James Ang published the Morlock story in there. Somebody reads that and says, hey, that's really cool. I want to publish something like that. I want to buy something that Howard Andrew Jones would want to publish. And so they start making stories that are more like the Morlock stories, right? That's kind of how sword and sorcery and how genres in general develop over time. Somebody read a Robert E. Howard story. They read a Clark Ashton story. They read a Michael Moorcock story. They read a C.L. Moore story. And they said, that rocked. I want to write more of it. And I hope to sell it to other people who want to read it. And so when we created Old Moon, we wanted to make a place where people would read stories that they saw and thought were, hey, that's an Old Moon story. It has a vibe and an aesthetic that is different than these other magazines out there, but it hits something that I really like, that I feel like it's really cool. And that makes me want to have more of those stories out there. So maybe I'll write one of my stories and send it in, or maybe I know this other author who writes stuff that I feel like vibes with Old Moon, but doesn't get published elsewhere, has a hard time getting published, perhaps, at Lightspeed or Clark's World or wherever. I don't necessarily know that we overlap with Clark's World in Lightspeed's readership much, but perhaps we do in some way. But either way, we have the story. Either way, we now have a place where we can send it. And part of the reason why we, like Julian said, why we started paying higher rates is that you get more people who are interested, and you get more people who think it might be worth it to write one of these stories. I would say the more people you can attract, the more you have a chance of getting one of those really, really cool stories. And I read all the submissions front to back, and which is unusual. And I used to try and comment on all of them, and the rest of us did. I think some other comments as well. And we don't do that as much anymore, just because the comments started to feel as if they're a little bit, perhaps too rote, if that makes sense. It was a little bit hard to comment in a way that made sense for all the stories. We're getting several hundred, like, all in a month, and I have to respond to them pretty quickly. Right. So hard to respond to them all at once. And I'm rambling now, so I'll stop. But one of the things that I really enjoyed was getting the chance to see authors whom I have not read before, and whom whom perhaps have not been published either before or in many places before, and getting a chance to read their stories that were phenomenal, beyond the equal of anything that I feel like I've read before, and getting a chance to read those and say, man, this feels like a story that kicks ass and might not get published elsewhere, because there doesn't feel like there are that many stories out there like it right now. And getting a chance to see those stories and then publish them is really, really cool. And to me, that's probably why we started Old Moon, and why we keep trying to improve it, keep trying to make it feel as if it's getting better. So we get more authors and more readers, and we get kind of that cycle of getting the magazine a little bit bigger and a little bit better with every iteration. And so that we can keep encouraging that cycle of getting people invested in this kind of literature, and getting them to play off of each other, and getting them to kind of create stories that were inspired in part by some of the stuff that we like. That was a long ramble. I apologize, but I think I wound it back to where it made sense. I hope.
I think it makes sense.
Cool. It's always good.
Well, one of my thoughts actually when you're talking is that do you think like is it similar to when attracting readers? Is that similar to like attracting writers? Right. I mean, like, how is that different? And like, okay.
I would say they're pretty different, and the reason why I would say that is because I think, maybe I overstepped it, and I shouldn't say they're pretty different. I'll walk it back. I'll instantly do one of those. I'll rewind it a little bit, and I'll say they're slightly different. And I'll say that the slight difference is that readers want something that looks really cool, and they are often, in my opinion, they're often looking for sort of an atmosphere that will attract them, and a feeling like, oh, this story's cool, or this idea is cool, and then of course they want a story that follows up on that. They want a story that is actually good and cool, but they're attracted by that vibe first. And I think authors are similarly attracted by a vibe, but I think, and for good reason, they're also attracted by, I want my stories to feel like they're in good hands. I want to feel like I'm being compensated well for my work, and I want to feel like the people handling the story aren't like, they're not going to pay me late. They're not going to go off the rails and perhaps, stop paying me for this, stop paying the royalties for the story, or stop doing all these other things. They want some kind of reliability. They want some kind of seriousness to the project. And so some of the some of the stuff around the magazine itself, like the way it looks, the masthead at the front, the layout and formatting, and the pay, and so on and so forth. All of those are things that might sell sort of the seriousness of a venue to an author, and make them feel like, okay, I feel like this is a place where I can actually submit a story, and perhaps not feel like I'm just throwing it into the wind. And they may get back to me in 6 months. They may get back to me in a year. They might get back to me never. It might not, it's pointless, right? I think that a lot of the really, really good venues, or really desirable ones, often do have that combination of, they have a very professional look and feel, they pay well, and they respond quite quickly, or quickish, I would say, quicker than perhaps I would say quicker than a lot of perhaps more what's the word I'm looking for? I would say the more mom and pop a magazine is, which is not a bad thing, but just the more of a sort of side project or hobby it might be, tends to be, you see a ballooning of the response time. And I think authors do pay attention to that sort of thing, and it can sometimes discourage people from sending a story out, especially if some places, for example, like we don't usually allow simultaneous submissions, but we try to respond pretty quickly, so that if you send a story to us, we're not just clinging on to it forever.
Right.
You get it to us, and we'll try and get back to you pretty quickly with an acceptance or rejection, so you can send it back out. And I know some people don't care, and they just send out simultaneous submissions no matter what. That's whatever. You do whatever you want. But for people who are strange little goody two shoes like myself, who see no simultaneous submissions and think I agree, I'm going to follow the rules, and I'm going to send it only to one place at one time. When that one place holds on to it for like 6 months, that can feel bad, and that can make me feel like maybe I won't send it to that place again. And now if they have year-long submissions, that's fine, because I can send it to them at any point, right? But if they have really limited submission windows like we do, if you get a reputation for holding on to stories for a long time and not giving people very timely rejections, then authors will talk to each other and they'll say, hey, maybe, don't worry too much about getting into their submission window, because it takes them way too long anyways. And, they have a 90 whatever % rejection rate. So it's not like you're super likely to get in the first place. So I would say those are some of the things that I think authors talk about. And there's some of the things, I mean, as an author myself, there's just some of the things that I think about too. You know, when I send in stories to other markets. But I think as readers and as authors, I think authors are almost always readers too, and so they do want to submit to magazines that they like the vibe of. I will say that's not always the case, because we've definitely gotten submissions from authors who have never read an issue of Old Moon, and had they read one, they would have known that we weren't the venue for their necromancer erotica, but which really did happen. A very explicit necromancer erotica, and he I think perhaps he might have sent it to us no matter what, but perhaps he just was confused by our cover art, and he saw skeletons and thought, I know, we're on the same wavelength, and he didn't bother to read. But but for the most part, I think authors are readers, and they want to submit to a magazine that they like the stories in. So in that case, attracting authors and readers, you have to have stories that authors read and think, hey, that's really cool. I think my story belongs with these other stories. But I think there are, as I said, some slight differences that I just rambled on about for a while.
You're good. No, I agree, actually, having coming from someone who does write and does read, right, that like if it's gonna take a while for them to get back from me, it's probably gonna be a rejection anyways. I'm less inclined in some ways to send. And the pay doesn't matter a ton to me unless I'm sending, like, unless I wrote something that's like vaguely science fiction. I'm like, I just send it to Clark's World first, right, type of thing, right? Because
why not?
Well, one, they respond insanely fast, right? But if it does get in, I'm going to get paid more than anywhere else, right? So I mean, like, but I mean, then as a reader, though, I could see that. I agree. I think that in some ways, like, the cover art matters probably more to. Okay, I'll be honest. I think something like Whetstone's cover arts and Old Moon's cover arts are pretty sick, just to be honest, right? And that attracts me with the type of stuff I like to write. But mostly as a reader, that's also just okay. You do sell books by their cover. I mean, that's just like how it works. I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but that's exactly what you do. And that makes sense. I mean, what else are you gonna do? So I mean, like my brother, though, right? So he doesn't write anything. Actually, he hardly reads at all. But he knows that you guys exist because of your Instagram account, and you used the words Dark Souls once, right? So I mean, like, or probably more than once, but right. And so I mean, like, he knows you guys exist, right? Because of that. Maybe he'll get an issue one of these days, right, and read it. But like I said, he doesn't read much at all. But I definitely think that yeah, writers, readers looking for different things. I think they can overlap, kind of like you mentioned. But then as far as I did want to ask about like why the aesthetic, like, kind of Old Moon, because I mean, there's going to be people hopefully watching this that have never read Old Moon, right? I mean,
sure.
And then with that, why that aesthetic? Also, like, you guys don't have like any ads in here. In fact, this is pretty much like a book. You know, it's not like traditional magazine format either.
Well, if you let me address the second part, our overhead is very low, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, it is just the trio, right? Kate contributes administrative stuff, helping videos. That cover, that's pen on paper that she drew herself, and perhaps that's Camp or Wilcox original, depending on what year it was in. I was a boxer, forgive me, I've been punched a lot, but so like that's a physical drawing somewhere under glass, right? And the aesthetic is for the same reason. We enjoy that type of artwork, and we think it frames what we're doing well. A concept like, is the vessel worthy of the captain? Is the captain worthy of the vessel? We want both to look good. We like the whole thing: the sails, the flag, the ship, the wood, the painting, the statue at front, all of it, right? All of it to look good. That way, it doesn't pretend to have quality. We've thought of it. And so thank you for liking it and enjoying it and noticing, because also, again, we have little to lose and we want it to be bold. Why not? We're going to take bold steps with the authors and the stories we put in there, to add poetry later on, or to add flourishing stuff on the side, which technically, like, doesn't matter what it does to us, right? And so As to the first part on how it's like actually done, I mean, it's mostly Graeme programs, stuff like that, and just hard work, elbow grease, the old-fashioned way. And we're just really happy to hear that you like it. It's exactly the kind of thing we would hope folks or people would notice. And we're just going to keep adding to it as well. We're not going to stop being creative once we've sold more. It's actually going to increase the budget, increase the ideas, and is actually quite a challenge in how to continue to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the aesthetic, I think we settled on it. Just because, like Julian said, it looks like the art and the kind of stories that we like to read and that we like to look at. I think we both grew up liking sort of I don't even know what you would call it, like metal music and like goth and industrial music. Julian makes kind of like KNFDM style, like a VNV Nation kind of music, kind of like synthwave plus like industrial rock. I don't make music; I'm very bad at it, but I love listening to music. But I love listening to, you know, as you might expect, all sorts of metal. I'm wearing an Electric Wizard shirt. I have very long hair and a beard. I look like I like metal.
You do.
And indeed, yeah. It's a carefully cultivated image to conform to what society expects of me. But we like that kind of art. We also like the medieval and Renaissance art that inspired a lot of that. I think when we first started making Old Moon, and Caitlin did that artwork for Old Moon 1, I remember I think one person on, it might have been even the old Whetstone Discord, made a joke about, hey, do I get a free copy if I know the medieval fencing manual that she used as a reference for those two knights fighting? And I said, we can't, you probably should get a free copy, but I don't know how to do that yet. We haven't published very much. And I'm confused by the Amazon store. But so those influences, those ideas of looking at Renaissance art and sort of some older aspects of literature, older genres of literature, was part of it from the get-go. I mean, we initially wanted to make lots of sword and sorcery stories. Sword and sorcery kind of not a super in vogue genre at the moment. Not necessarily the oldest genre out there. You know, it's kind of invented in the 30s or kind of coalesced in the 30s. So maybe about a century old at this point. Some far older genres out there, but certainly not necessarily in vogue. And so I think the aesthetic, that kind of older, black and white, almost like I think about almost as like 80s or 90s, like D&D or like Warhammer manual or like Warhammer rulebook kind of stuff. I think mixed in with some of the sort of more Renaissance or medieval, almost like woodcut influence. We're trying to get some of that into the magazine, especially with these upcoming issues. I think we just chose that because we think that it gels well with the stories, and because it just kind of personally appealed to us as what we like and what we thought of, and we figured if we like it, we're not so unique in our tastes that we're singular, right? We like things that are popular. We like Warhammer. We like Nine Inch Nails. We like Led Zeppelin and stuff like that, right? We like things that people buy, and people enjoy, and blah 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 blah. It's not like we're sitting here reading. I don't even know what would be the equivalent. We're not like sitting here listening to like a demo tape that's been sent to 12 people ever, published, you know, made in the depths of Norway or something.
You said you would never talk about that again. My God.
That's fair. I would listen to your demo tape though. If you're in the depths of Norway, you can send it to me. So we figured if we like these things, and other people would like them too. And you know what? Even if they didn't, we at least would have given some cool stories a home and some authors and artists a paycheck that might not otherwise have gotten that paycheck. So it would have been a worthy endeavor, even if it wasn't super popular. And it ended up being a little bit more popular, perhaps, than we thought it would be, which is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. No, when I look at Old Moon now, I do kind of think of well, Renaissance, medieval, high medieval kind of typically, but late. also think, like I think actually it's mentioned in your Kickstarter, which I just realized I didn't mention at all. You guys are not a Kickstarter backer kit crowdfunding campaign thing or whatever, same thing. All right,
Yeah.
I mean, like right, just like it's Kleenex, it's a Kickstarter essentially. But you guys are having that right now, and I think you actually mentioned that that will be linked below, by the way, for sure. But
Thank you.
I think you mentioned did you mention Albrecht Dürer in that? I can't even remember.
I don't think so, but we should. If we could find somebody who can reproduce Albrecht Dürer art, we'd love to know them, because I'm a big fan. I think I have Night, Death, and the Devil hanging not in this room, but in the room next to this room.
Yeah,
it's hanging up there. But yeah,
Durer's great. I mean, I guess I think of like stuff like Dürer or even Doré a little bit maybe, or
Doré definitely. We actually, one of the artists that we were talking to that is drawing for us for this issue, Karmitzid. He's a German like metal artist. He's done some work for like Visigoth, a whole bunch of bands. But I think the one that attracted me, he did one for the band. It's like a power metal band, or like new wave of British heavy metal band, Visigoth. He did one for their album called Abyss Walker, which is based speaking of Dark Souls. I think jumping back a few minutes in the conversation, it's like a two song EP. The art is based on the character Arthurius from the video game Dark Souls. If you have never played it, that doesn't mean anything to you. He's just a cool looking dude with a sword. But a specific cool looking dude with a sword who I like. And so he did this artwork, Karmitzid did, and he has some other art on his in his portfolio that is very like kind of like Doré influenced, and at least I thought it was, and I talked to him a little bit about it, and he said, yeah, it is Doré influenced. I was like, hell yeah, man, do you want to do some of that for us? And he was very excited about it, and so I like that. And I've had a few interactions like that with authors and artists where we talk about them and say, hey man, we thought that this reminded us of this, and they say, yeah, it did, and that's really cool, and I want to do more stuff like that. And I said, well, do I have the job for you? Because you can please do some for us. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And so I would say good eye, and also yes, I'm glad that you thought of the Doré influence on your own, because I'm glad that it comes through at least a little bit, because obviously even to his work's masterful. Our magazine, we hope, makes people feel the same way that his art makes me feel when I look at it. When I look at his illustrations, rather, for like Dante's Inferno, or for Paradise Lost, or for Orlando Furioso, they make me feel a certain way. It's really cool, and I hope our magazine helps people feel the same way, or a similar way at least.
I understand that. I was actually just looking at his Angelica, from Orlando Furioso just the other day, and I was like, wow, man, Doré, he never fails. So
I know he knocks it out of the park, man. He knocks it out of the park. I know. So this perhaps I'm going off script, but I know that you do you do some of your own. I don't know if I would. Is it? I know you've talked about translating certain things like into Old English, or doing stuff like that. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I've seen snippets of it, like on your social media, where I think you had translated like some text from Old English. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I don't want to misquote it. But I thought that was super cool, and I am, despite the occasional appearance of a Latinism in whatever I write, I don't really speak any language other than English, which is the most American thing I've ever said. Hell yeah. But it's evident that you do. And so did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's super cool.
Yeah. Well,
what attracted you to doing that in the first place?
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things I can feel some sort of I don't know, like brotherhood. That's not the right word, but the right one's not coming to mind. That's close enough. With Old Moon is because I really like that. I mean, like I like when I read your Old Moon, the stories in Old Moon, right? I get ideas of something like I'd see in an illumination or a miniature of a jewelry, right, or like a grotesque on top of a cathedral or something. I'm a medievalist essentially, right? So I'm a humanities major actually in my undergrad. I did anthropology for a while there too, so I can appreciate stuff like John Olfort's prehistory stuff. but right now I'm essentially studying philology, right? So
very
like
cool.
Tolkien did essentially.
Yeah,
In fact, that's where I got the inspiration. So um, I translated the first 3 sentences of The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole into Gothic because I thought that made sense.
It does. I think
Way
it's
more
very
freaking
funny.
work. Took me like 12 hours probably of actual work to do 3 sentences. Very difficult to go from a modern English into a dead language, which does not have the same capabilities. Gothic is really not highly tested anyway as a language.
Yeah.
I had to make up a few things. Hopefully I did that okay. But like right now, I have a I put it on a separate channel actually, but I call it the Alfrich Homily Project. So it's very Christian, but Alfrich is a monk that
Yep.
wrote right around the millennium, turn of millennium, right? His first series of homilies came out in like 989, maybe 990 something. And I translate one of those a month, right? In fact, I'm looking at doing the one in July for Saint Swithin's Day. There's not a lot of important Christian holidays in July, so I translate those. I translate from Old English into Modern English. It's just fun, pretty much. In fact, not to like I didn't come in here wanting to talk about my writing much at all, actually, but it just comes up, I guess, which makes sense. You guys are having the call after your campaign, right? I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, we're doing an open submission window. Yeah.
and I was like, oh yeah, I should write this story, and I wrote it in Middle English, which was probably a mistake. But like the idea was actually early modern originally, but it's pretty much Middle English, right? And because I like doing that, it's just fun, Like I'm definitely
It
one of those
is.
people who artistic expression for myself, not for anyone else. Probably why I've sold very little. But like so,
Me
but
too.
I like the language aspect of things. It's I was talking to Christopher Rocchio about that Middle English story, and I'm like, it's not going to sell anywhere. He's like, it's okay. You'd lose your soul if you didn't do it. Essentially, is what he said, right?
I agree with him. It's very cool. I mean, I think it is so awesome, and it's really hard for me to express how awesome I think it is that you wrote a story in Middle English, and I think even just the effort of doing so is is worth it. I think there's and I'm probably going to butcher this. I don't know who did this quote first. Maybe no one did. Maybe it was invented by the internet purely to make people post infographics on Instagram or something. But I've seen a quote, and maybe Caitlin will know, about the art or the medium is the message or something like that. And I think for us, obviously, language is the medium, and the language that they're speaking in is the medium. And I think that when it comes to the language itself, this can include, even not just the tongue, the actual language that you're using, but the prose and the way it's conveyed. All of those, I think, contribute to the message, contribute to the feeling of the literature. There's a book that I really like called The Wake by Paul Kingsnorth, which is written not in. Have you heard of it?
I have not heard of it.
Oh,
No.
it's you would love it. It is you might love it. It depends. So it's told around the year 1066 and 1068. It is about somebody who's based on Hereward the Wake, English rebel from
Yeah.
Putative English rebel, whether he existed or not, who knows, who fought in the aftermath of the Norman conquest of England. This is based kind of on him. He's not really the character is named Buckmaster. He is a Englishman living in England when William the Conqueror takes over England. And it's all written in a sort of half modern English, half middle. I say half. It's very much influenced by Middle and Old English, and it is at first very difficult to read because you're not at least difficult for me, probably less difficult for you, but difficult to read because you're not used to how he's constructing some of the sentences. You're not used to how he's using the language itself. But as you get used to it, you sort of get into the flow of the language and you realize, first it's meant to be read by modern English speakers. So it's not full Middle English. But the way it invests you in the story and the way it invests you in this character who's not necessarily very likable, You know, he's not necessarily the most likable by modern standards, but the way it invests you in this character's worldview and the way that he is experiencing this dead and dying world. It's a post-apocalyptic story, really, right? It's about the death of this person's culture and their country as it gets destroyed by these invaders, or perhaps not destroyed, but changed irrevocably, changed in a way that it can't go back, especially in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. You know, perhaps after, you know, down the line, there's some more intermingling of cultures, of course, but in the immediate moment, he is, you know, the culture, their government is destroyed, and there's very much a lot of killing and murder and burning of towns and so on, as sort of moving to conquer Harry's England. And the way he tells it, and the way he uses language, and the way he uses non-modern language, you know, archaic language to tell that story, it is great. And it's, you know, and there are parts that he, you know, that has the way the font is typeset in a font that purposely recalls or is modeled on early 15th or late 15th, early 16th century typesets. Looks very cool. The wood pulp for the pages of the book, at least in the copy that I have, is also very sort of grainy and thick. Feels almost like the sort of pulp that they use for the early copies of Tales from the Egyptian Skull. Very cool book, super cool effect. Slow reading for me, because the language can be a little bit hard to struggle through, it can sometimes make me struggle. But I love that sort of thing. We've published a few things like it. I think in issue 5 or 6, we published a poem by Zachary Boss called "A Warning Against Wolves," which was written in a purposely archaic sort of early modern English, or perhaps, you know, kind of mix of early modern English, Middle English. Perhaps on that cusp there. So we are amenable to the idea, and I think it's cool. I think, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want everything I read to be like that, but I like that kind of experimentation. I feel like there's not there. I think, you know, there is an essay written by Ursula K. Le Guin called "From Elfland to Poughkeepsie," and much more famous in our magazine, but famous essay where she talks about how the role that language plays in transporting the reader into what she calls Elfland, right? Into the fantastic area, into the area that is outside of our normal experience, the Poughkeepsie, right? And I think that language, like when you write the story in Middle English, or when Paul Kingsnorth writes his story in a sort of shadow English, a modernized version of Middle or Old English, or when somebody writes something like, say, E.R. Edison writes to Werner Roberos in Jacobean English, that medium of the language, nothing, if it's done well, nothing I find transports me better to the other world, to that Elfland, than that kind of language. Which I think, I mean, perhaps if you were thinking of submitting to, if anybody watching this thinking of submitting to Old Moon, perhaps, and you feel like you have the ability and desire to write like that, perhaps this is foreshadowing or some sort of advertisement to encourage you to do that. Because I would love to read it, even if we don't always end up publishing everything that we get that's like that. But it is always a joy to read, and we don't get much that is like that. Because again, as you said, there just aren't that many markets that are going to publish something that's written like that. But I always find myself very intrigued by them, and it wasn't always like that. But I find, especially as I do study more medieval and Renaissance literature and medieval and Renaissance art and thought and philosophy, I find myself more and more attracted to that kind of medium when it comes to using it to portray a sort of archaic or strange world, which is ultimately what I want to read about mostly. I don't necessarily, if I wanted to read about modern fiction, or modern world rather, I would read more sort of modernized fiction. But oftentimes when I'm reading fantasy, I want to read about that kind of that sort of strange othered reality that we get from that sort of more, that older or more archaic world. That was an answer to a question no one asked, but you now have an answer to
it. I like that. Sorry, my camera's out of focus.
Oh, that's okay.
Maybe? I don't know. No, I like that. Well, it's funny. I mean, because like, and I can understand. Yeah, if every this would never happen. If every, you know, I don't even know how many submissions you guys get, but if every 200 submissions, all the 200 submissions, let's say you got or whatever, they were all in Middle English, that probably would be no bueno. But just partially because it's harder to read. But and I don't think you'd get 200 anyways because it's harder to write. But I do think it's interesting though. Sorry, when you mentioned Hereward, the Wake type character, and I think it's interesting how the stuff language. Okay, this is probably too much of a tangent. Sorry, language guy.
I don't mind.
It not just language, but language and literature, how it changes. I mean, because when you mentioned Elfman and Poughkeepsie as well, so like, right, like my comparison would have been something like, which that's a better comparison that people watching this would actually know. But like even something like you read, let's go with the Bible, right? Because everyone's read the Bible up and actually most people probably still have read the Bible. So I mean, like at least part of it. The King James version, Dewey Rames, came out right around the same time. Okay. Old Moon is the King James version essentially, and not to scare people away. And I'll have questions about that might be like not convinced at this point yet. I'm just King James version is better. So like it's got more of a sense of art to it, more of a poetic sense to it, which makes it better in my opinion. But
I agree.
And so yeah, there we go. And one thing I also though that you remind me of is as far as like perspective shift. I mean, because someone like Arthur, for example, right? King Arthur. The first mention of Arthur in English is from Lachaman's Brute, okay, which is like he pretty much took it from Wace's Brute, okay. And Wace took most of his story from Geoffrey Monmouth, of course. But and it's not an Arthurian tale strictly. It's called the Brute, right? Because it's for Brutus of Troy. And the guy who founded Britain. I love apocryphal stuff like that, but you get it all the time in medieval stuff. But it's funny to read Lachaman's Brute because the guy writing that is like very obviously English, and you can kind of see where he's connecting to Arthur, who's Welsh, right? And it's like what like your ancestors are the enemies, by the way, like so. But then you can kind of see why in a sense, because now he has the Normans, right? The Normans are there, and they're like, "Oh, hey, wait, like I kind of get how the Welsh felt now." Like, dang it, no. And so then you start seeing the English connect with someone like Arthur, who is not English at all, right? You know what I mean? British, but not English, right? And so like, interesting perspective. It's actually a similar thing happens right when the Vikings start harrying England in the the 8th century or whatever, and they're like, oh shoot, we did this, right? So it's like a couple of centuries before, right? It's Saxon Shore and all that. So anyways, I just say it was interesting, and I like getting that. I mean, literature in that sense changes though, right? I mean, because like you could read you read something like Lachaman's or Wace or even Geoffrey Monmouth. They're actually all written as histories, and they're way, way more in line with literature these days, right? Because there's not a lot in them that's very historical, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting shift, I think. Also, it's just an interesting. The whole earlier thing. Your magazine is very accessible. I'm not, but I'm going to say like when you read like Middle English, that first off that's hard to read, but then when you read the Middle English in the manuscript, like I was trying to read the Marjorie Kemp. Right. And I'm like, okay, like it's one thing to read the transliteration, it's another thing entirely to read the script, because one, even if they just took that and put it in, some Times New Roman for me, there's still a bunch of superscripts and like abbreviations, and I'm like, I can't read this still, right? Or it takes a lot more work, and then you get to the actual manuscript itself, and then they need to study codicology, which is why I have something like this actually. To read the manuscripts, but
very fun.
Which is a lot more fun, by the way, but just a lot more work. Time is always a problem. But anyways, that's my tangent. I did have questions actually for you guys about so Old Moon is short stories, right? Okay. I know a lot of people, particularly on BookTube, that don't read a lot of short stories. So what would you say to people that maybe don't read a lot of short stories? Would you say anything to them to try to convince them to read Old Moon?
No, we're aware. When we're capable of doing long form, we've thought about doing like novellas or like duets, bringing that thing back. where it'll have the substance of like a medium-sized novel, and you'll get your money's worth, which we hope you always feel when you get one of our volumes. And with the backer kit going now, obviously the better it does, the more we can pay, the more funding we have. And then Graeme's extended to his first novella, right? We went again from an earnest, good first volume to now one of our independents having their own first side shoot. In that same way, we would hope to do long form when it arises, right? It says Graeme can speak much more to the logistics of it, but we want the quality and everything to be there. And so, but that would be the ideal.
Yeah, so we do want to expand into making, so I suppose that to build on what Julian said, we do want to expand into getting more long form works out there. But for people who haven't read many short stories before, but might be interested in the idea of reading a short story, I would say they have two main advantages. One is that if you have very little time, which, as you said, when it comes to trying to get anything done, whether it be writing, whether it be learning how to decipher the manuscripts of the past, or whether it be anything else in these days, time is always at least for me, and I'm sure for many of us, the deciding factor. And short stories are just much easier to read than in a short amount of time than longer things are. And especially all of our issues get released on e-reader as well. Once you can get a PDF or an EPUB or a Kindle copy, and so you can just read. I know my usual routine is I'll read before I go to sleep, and I'll often read a short story or two and before I fall asleep. So I would say if you are an avid reader, but you want to perhaps indulge in some things that are a little bit easier to finish without having to commit to a full novel, then short story collections or anthologies or magazines are a great way to do that. They also give you a really wide sampling, which is this is originally why I started. I never read short stories as a child and as a young adult, and only really once in college I started reading short stories because I had no money. And but I wanted to read things, and I wanted to read but I wanted to read a lot of authors, right? And I just didn't have enough money to afford them. And when I was in Barnes and Noble, I saw that that in front of all the books that I wanted to buy, there were these other books that were full of many authors called anthologies. And I bought them, and I was like, they look cool. They have Cthulhu on them, and I've just learned who Cthulhu is. And I want to read about them. And I remember this is the first anthology I ever bought. It's probably not the first one. Probably the first one I ever bought was probably like a Warhammer anthology, to be honest. But the first one I can really remember buying, probably with my own money and not my parents lended money to me as a child, would have been probably like the New Cthulhu 2 or something, like some sort of like Pyre Press or Nightshade Press version of a book. And it had a whole bunch of authors in it. It had John Langan, it had Elizabeth Bear, it had Laird Barron. All the first time I saw those authors, some of the authors I love the most in the world now. I love reading all their stuff. I get everything they can the moment it comes out, the moment it's available to me. I met those authors the first time through short stories. I met them through these anthologies. I never would have read John Langan or Laird Barron, who now appeared in this magazine, which is super cool, for me at least. I never would have read people like Gene Wolfe. Gene Wolfe is my favorite author ever. I never would have read Gene Wolfe if I hadn't read some of the short stories first. I think he actually probably was in one of those Cthulhu-themed anthologies. He had a story that was, I think, like a take on one of T.E.D. Klein's short stories. I can't quite recall. It was a really cool one. It's about I think it's a riff on maybe T.E.D. Klein's Black Man with a Horn. And I can't remember exactly what it's called. It takes place on like in the somebody's interviewing as usual with Wolf, a whole bunch of stuff going on. This is not relevant to the discussion, but it's somebody's interviewing somebody in the South after the Depression, and weird Cthulhu-y stuff happens. Super cool story, has lots of layers to it. I never would have read it. I never would have noticed it unless I had gotten one of these anthologies. So if you're looking for reasons to start reading short stories that can introduce you to authors that you never would have encountered before, it's a pretty low risk, low investment way of getting introduced to an author. There are certain authors that I really love, but they write really, really long series or really, really long books. Like Steven Erikson writes Malice and Books of
Mhm.
the Fallen. That's 10 door stoppers worth of material. I like those books, but I nowadays as a 33-year-old man, I do not have the time that I did as a teenager to read, and so I need to
Mhm.
invest in things that I kind of know I might like before I read them, before I spend money on them.
Mhm.
So reading some short stories by Erickson convinced me, all right, I like this guy's stuff, and I'm going to read these Malice and Books of the Fallen, right? So I think
Right.
if you are trying to think, should I read short stories? Should I review short stories? Then they're cheaper perhaps than investing in a full series of novels, quicker to read, get introduced to a lot of really, really cool authors. And also the short story, and just from a craft and from an enjoyment perspective, short stories are given more room, ironically, even though they're shorter, more room to experiment and to do weird stuff. I think short stories often end up being a little bit more experimental than the novel, because they are less investment, and so the author feels like perhaps you can do something weirder. It's perhaps easier to write a short story in Middle English than a novel in Middle English, and so you're more likely to do it, right? If you thought I have to the only thing I can write is a novel, and so I'm gonna have to write this all in Middle English. That's tough. That's a really big job. If you're like I don't necessarily know I can write 60,000 words in Middle English right now, but I might be able to write 3,000 or 6,000 words. Same for me. I don't know that I would be able to write a novel right now about the characters that I like to write about, but I can write a short story about them, something like that. And so I think that if you're looking for weirder, more experimental stuff, which I think some people are, or you're looking for things that are made a little bit more off the beaten path. If you're kind of tired of some of the novels that take up a lot of that space in Barnes and Noble, then short stories might give you a little bit more space to interact with stories that are a little bit weirder and might be a little bit more to your taste. It might, in the end, can sometimes be more enjoyable than reading a full novel. And I would say if you're talking about booktube people in general, perhaps I don't know if shorts are a thing that people do. I don't interact with much social media, unfortunately. But if you were to do like YouTube Shorts or Instagram Shorts or whatever, I don't know. What they're called, Instagram Reels, I guess. Short form videos. The shortest form of literature is a short story, and so that probably might jive well with a short video. So maybe you want to make a short video, read a short story, do a short review of it, and make it into a video. And I would say that could be a reliable form of content if other booktubers are out there watching this and looking for ideas on how to fill up their day.
Yeah, no, that is a good idea and some fair points there. Actually, I'll mention I have not finished Malaz and Book of the Fallen because they're so long. I plan to,
no.
right? But I've read
They're
the
up
first
there.
8. But like I'm like I need some time.
I also read the first 8 and then did not read because the last 2 are so long. They're longer than the rest of them, I think. Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, they're both so long, and I think Dust of Dreams starts out with like just a whole new plot line of stuff, if I recall correctly. I remember reading it and just being like, no, I have to go do other stuff, and I didn't get back to them it took me years and years to actually end up finishing and to read them. I got past them because I was like, there's just so many characters, there's so many plot lines, and he keeps making new ones. I need a rest.
Sure does.
So I understand.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. I do like reading his like Localane and Corporal Brooch stuff. That's
Those are fun.
That's cool. But yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one because I think it's been over a year since I read Toll the Hounds, which is 8. I'm like, when am I gonna do 9 and 10? And I'm like, not right now. I do. I have another follow-up question to that one, but before that, actually, based off what you both mentioned, actually, is where. Again, this is like really random. I don't even know who's gonna watch the whole hour. Someone probably will, probably several times. But where can you buy Old Moon? Actually, like, where is it available?
Oh, that's a great question. It's available on our website, oldmoonpublishing.com. It's also available on Amazon, and I believe you can get all of the issues currently again on our backer kit campaign. Which still hopefully I believe this will come out. The campaign will still be ongoing. You can get all of the print issues and our the one novella we released, Contra Amatorius Mundi. It's about knights on a quest through the underworld, and one of them, his girlfriend is a nun. She's in there too, and they fight weird, crazy monsters, and all sorts of fun stuff happens. So you can get all those together in print and digital format on our backer kit as well. But if you just wanted to purchase them individually, they're available there too. But yeah, so our website, our backer kit campaign, and Amazon has, I think, most of them as well. We have some merch as well. We have some T-shirts and mugs and so on that people can purchase too.
I need to get a physical copy of the novella. I don't have one, but
It's
so,
beautiful.
I mean, it's
beautiful.
Yeah, we're hoping to. My hope is that we can perhaps come up with a nicer looking version of the novella that has a few of the other. Because I have a few other stories that have the same characters, and then one of them just got released in Book of Blades Volume 3 that Rogues in the House, the podcast, puts out. So that came out. Maybe I think I might hear the buzzing now. Anyways, but anyways, I have a few more stories that have the same characters that appear in the novella, and so I'm hoping that we might be able to put together a nicer looking edition that has some of those stories bundled together with the novella, so you get a little bit thicker of a book, and perhaps some illustrations and nicer cover art and so on and so forth. So if you haven't gotten the physical copy yet, then perhaps if you want a slightly nicer looking version, you might maybe hold out for a little bit and see what we come up with.
Wait for that deluxe edition. Okay, cool. And so that answers that question. I have a couple more questions, and then we could probably wrap it up. That was my garage door opening. That wasn't that time. That was, what are the other ones? Let's see. This was. Where's that question? Oh, wait. Before I get to that question, actually, you have a year one anthology. Is that only digitally available, or?
No, there are print copies available on Amazon, and I think the hardcover might also be available through our backer kit too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have that one either. I mean, I have all the issues, so I don't know how important it is. But
it's just basically just all the issues bundled together. If somebody wanted them, it does have really cool cover art by Sanctity. He's an artist that we worked with for issue 6 and for the year 1 cover art. It's probably I think I have the proof copy right here. See if I can get it. But yeah, so you see he has a little skull knight. He's doing the Alas Poor York thing with a severed head with a fun little knight haircut. So we have that. It's one of my favorite cover arts that we've gotten done. But it doesn't necessarily. But if you have issues 1 through 4 already, it's really only just those 4 bundled together. So you don't necessarily. It's not a need sort of thing.
It's nice art though. I feel like. Honestly, for Old Moon, I feel like the word Florilegium is like would be your thing, except for no one knows what that is. So maybe not. Over anthology, I mean, right? Anthology, obviously, a very useful word. But anyways, the question.
Florilegium. I think that used to be like there was a. This is perhaps dating me, but I think there was like a forum online. Back in the days called Florilegium. I think it was like an SCA historical research forum or something. But I remember like when I first started trying to get on the internet, and my family had dial-up, so getting on the internet was hard. I wanted to know about history, and I remember stumbling across the Florilegium and trying to figure out 1, what does this word mean? 2, what are they're talking about sources? What is a source? How do I read them? And I remember being very entertained by that. So that's unconnected. But your mention of the word just brought like that core memory of my childhood. Just like hearing the dial tone as the CRT monitor turns on and the dial tone goes, and I have to make sure my sister isn't going to call her friends and boot me off the AOL or whatever. So.
Yes, but I don't actually remember dial-up at all. A few years younger than you, Graham, but
no.
I know of it. I mean, like, I know, of course, yes, so old. No, but yeah. So what the other question I kind of had? This is again me thinking of kind of like BookTube people audiences. So people who might be watching this is on the other end of some channels or some viewers, they only really read older fiction. They like this is mostly the older guys that read sci-fi on YouTube. To be honest, I watch those guys, but so I'm not hating. But they don't read a lot of new things, right? They'll read even someone like Michael K. Vaughan, for example. He reads Sword and Sorcery, but it's almost always the older stuff, right? Any words for those people to see if you get anyone to invest in a newer fiction?
Well, I'm old enough that I have teenage children. Does that make me old? Oh, like it's the old moon for old timers. I mean, I think the some of our stuff is, we have an opposite problem. Like it's so challenging. We're like, oh, is it modern enough for people to be interested in it next to these other modern stories?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be my answer. If anything, we're trying to respect the old ways of doing things, but also modernizing them enough. And that's challenging. And then also being like, well, I'm a fan of both, so I want to challenge that reader too. And that's why the volumes are so complicated and interesting, right? And so stimulating, right? And maybe the conversation may meander somewhere, but again, it begets it. Again, that's the whole point, is to stimulate you and make you interested, to excite you to want to read again, right? You like the cover, the binding, the artwork, and it's challenging. Oh, it's old and new. And so I would say, if you're not old enough, if you're so old you can't be excited anymore, you only want to read the old things. I mean, we're trying to bring that salon back one person at a time. I can't make it any clearer. Read the book, right, and give it a thumbs down. And or for instance, I adore it, but read Pain Wins for free. If you truly wish for zero commitment, go to our website, oldmoonpublishing.com, and read it. It's on fiction. You can read Pain Wins. And if those few tales there don't jive with you, then perhaps we have failed you. And that we will say, buy number 9, try that one.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Julian. I think that we like both. We like a lot of older fiction, and we like a lot of newer fiction. And I think that a lot of what some of the older stories, like Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith, and those kind of guys, H.P. Lovecraft, the kind of the weird tales, the originators of cosmic horror and sword and sorcery. I think a lot of what those guys did is still relevant today. I think they liked stories that were about people in hard circumstances trying to conquer or succeed in a way that didn't compromise their values. That's kind of the essence of a lot of these heroes, right? Conan wants to get the gold, win the throne or something, but he wants to do it his way. And that's cool, and that's a really awesome vibe and atmosphere for a story, right? And he does it in the context of ruins and big snakes happening, and people and barbarian armies clashing with civilized armies, all sorts of fun stuff. That stuff is super cool, and it happens in our stories too. And I think I think that in that respect, the sort of the divide that a lot of people create in their head between old and new, I don't necessarily know that it really exists. I think that a lot of the same ideas, the same things that appeal to us are still there in a lot of newer stories. And I think that if people give it a chance, if they read the books, they read some of the free stories that we have on our website, I think they'll like them. I think they'll know that we're publishing the stories because we want to see the same stuff that we want to see. We want to feel the same way that we felt when we started reading. We want to feel that way again and again and again and again. And so we publish stories that try and make us feel that way. And so we read Robert E. Howard, we read Gene Wolfe, we read Tanith Lee, we read C.L. Moore. We read their stories and we liked them, and we want to feel that way again. And so we hope that we pick stories that make you feel that way. I can understand why a lot of people might want to only read fiction that they know they'll like. I do the same thing. I reread certain stories and certain books over and over again because I find them really captivating, and I like the way they make me feel. And I sometimes lament that there aren't stories that necessarily feel the way that, say, Lord of the Rings makes me feel. Right? I don't know there's ever been a story that made me feel that way again, and that story's it came out in the 50s or 60s. I actually don't know when Lord of the Rings was technically released, but I know, but it's old. It's older than I am. I know that much. But I've never read a story that made me feel that way. I've never read a story that made me feel like Gene Wolfe's book, The New Sun. I've never read a story that made me feel like Tanith Lee's Blood on a Rose duology, which is an utterly unique historical fantasy vampire story, which you would think is not necessarily the most appealing to perhaps somebody who looks like me and enjoys the sort of stories that I like. But she wrote this crazy series of books about a speculative Christianity in medieval Central Europe, but it's like a slightly changed version of medieval Central Europe. And there are vampires, and it's all connected to their version of Christianity in some weird way. It's very little of it is explained directly. There's no exposition. There's no character saying, yes, as you know, Babarif, here's how Christ is, in fact, a Dracula. They don't do that. And so I like that. I like when the characters don't try to explain stuff. You have to figure it out yourself. I like that. That's it. That's an older. That's probably. I think she wrote that. I think like in the 90s or something, and it wasn't super popular, right? It didn't sell super well. But I really like that story. I really like other stories out there too. That I think a lot of people want to reread Conan. They want to reread perhaps Cull. They want to reread Michael Moorcock's Elric stories. And I think hopefully that we are publishing stories that I think people would also want to reread in that way. So I think if you are out there and you're reading, you really like what the old stories are like, and think, hey, I want to reread these and I want other stories that are like them. I think, to be honest, Old Moon will have some stories that you really like. And you'll think, man, that was super cool. It'll have some other stories that you don't like, and that you'll think, man, that was super weird, and I didn't like it. But I think that's fine. I think that for the price of a couple bucks, some stories that you like and some stories that perhaps you didn't like as much is well worth it. And sometimes, and this happens more rarely as we get older, perhaps, but it still happens, I promise. You'll read a story and you're like, I didn't like that. That was dumb. But then you'll think about it and you'll think, you know what? It was good. In the end, I like it, even though I didn't want to like it. And that annoys me, but I have to admit it was okay. And that happens too. And I think that will happen with Old Moon as well on occasion. I think there'll be stories that you read and you'll think, it didn't land for me that much. And you'll think about it. And you'll go to bed thinking about it, and you'll wake up thinking about it, and you'll go back to it, and you'll reread it. You're like, there's no way that this story's beating me. There's no way it was good. I know it sucked, and I'm angry at it, and I'm going to reread it until I'm convinced that it sucks. And then sooner, before you realize it, you've reread it 5 times, and you're like, God damn it, it is good. Fine, take more of my money, Old Moon, which is the real thing that you should say to yourself after reading the issue of Old Moon. But anyways, yes. So I think that for those of us who do read older fiction almost exclusively, I think that we do have something for you. I think we do have stories. I think the one that Julian mentioned, Sasha Brown's Pain Wins from Old Moon Volume 5, it's on our website. Super cool stories. It's a story about Stone Age kind of barbarian type people getting into, I will say, a messy conflict. And we have some other stories that I think would appeal to people. Charles Gramlich's Skullful of Ghosts in Old Moon, I believe, 6. Very classic sword and sorcery. Josh Reynolds' story in Old Moon, I think also Old Moon 6. I have it right here. Let me see. The Orphan of Bones, about very Clark Ashton Smith-esque ghouls. If you like Clark Ashton Smith, if you like sort of, what would I call it? Sort of a more amoral sort of sword and sorcery protagonist, very much like Conan the Barbarian. If he was also a desert-dwelling cannibal woman, then you might like. It's a very different version of Conan, I promise you. You might also like that. And we have other stories that are I would say, along those lines. We do have the occasional story that does feel like perhaps it was written by somebody who might be very fond of stories that are written in Middle English and early modern English. And those might be a little bit harder if you're looking for a little bit less to your taste. If you're looking for like another Conan or another Elric, but we do have stories that are more similar to some of those old ones, even if we do have some that feel perhaps a little bit more out there, a little bit stranger.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, or both of you mentioned the free stories available on your website to read. There's a good variety in Old Moon. I mean, if it was all just the same thing, I would not read it. I mean, I definitely get sick of reading certain sword and sorcery stories because a lot of it, as much as people don't mention it, a lot of sword and sorcery I read still seems like the same clonins people complain about from the 70s and 80s. Like, hey, wait, you're doing the same thing. But Old Moon doesn't do that, which is nice. Hot take, maybe. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. Yeah, I kind of do. So
I think you're fine. I think some people's feathers are in a permanent state of ruffle, and I think it's impossible to not ruffle them. But I agree. I think perhaps there are some stories out there that end up feeling a little bit more derivative. We hope to not have too many of those, or we're just derivative of things that are different, which is also fun sometimes. Sometimes if we have a million derivatives of Robert Howard, maybe a few derivatives of Michael Shea or Jack Vance or Tanith Lee. Maybe that's also fun too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like that stuff. And I like, and I don't want to make it like there's a certain auteur or something like that. Like there's no, maybe there's arrogance on my part, but I don't get it reading Old Moon, at least, right? There's no elitist like sense of yes, this is a magazine of literature, right, or something like that, right?
You can look at us. We're not auteurs. You can look at us. I'm wearing a shirt about a band that sings about marijuana, and I don't even smoke it. No, we're not snobs. We just have really eclectic tastes. That's it.
Yeah, and it is good stuff. Definitely. I work in a factory. Okay, like it's definitely like I'm not getting any bad vibes or anything from Old Moon, right? So I'm definitely working that blue collar job. I hate it, by the way. So anyways, so good stuff. I have one last question. I don't want to take too much more of your time. So you can answer this as rapidly or as slowly as you want, of course. It's kind of like a two-part question, whether or not you want to answer part of it. I don't know how you guys feel as editors. What are some of just like, if people can get a feel, since you are in charge of Old Moon, you kind of, I think Graeme, as you mentioned earlier, that you really, when you submit stories, you're submitting it to an editor in a sense. So you're kind of writing for an editor, right? Whether or not you're, doing that strictly and whether or not you have that in mind strictly as a writer. And I guess I've kind of gotten an idea. What are some of your, first part, what are some of your like favorite stories or works of art, even if you just want to, like we talked about Doré earlier, for example, and stuff. And also, what's the favorite of yours in Old Moon, if you feel like you can answer that? I don't know. So.
All right, Julian, did you want to go first? Or you want me to go?
Sure.
First?
Well, if I absolutely were forced to have a single book to take with me, it would be Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. That would be the one. Perhaps for the same reason that Graeme had spoken of earlier, that it takes you to the Outland. Nothing has done that to me, or the Outer World, right? Sorry if I misspoke there. No piece of anything ever has transported me in such a way as that book at that time for me, for whatever reason. And I could speak volumes on that because I really enjoyed it. Although, and some of the darkness and the privation and desperation of the character in that book is not unlike some of the stuff in Sword and Sorcery. When Conan's like bleeding face down, scrabbling on rocks, and he tricks the thing or whatever, right? That desperation from the fiction. So the fiction author tries to imagine a scenario so wild and horrible, right? That it's thrilling and horrible at the same time. Well, this is just a guy existing in England, you know what I mean, in poverty. So that's my favorite book. My favorite film is by Kubrick. Again, similar type of vibe, I guess. Barry Lyndon. Again, similar countries, similar language, and I just adore the movie. Some of the lyrics of my old crummy band that inspired Graeme to make the concept, again, that spiraling upward, which I think is really cool. come from, Kiss Me, Me Boy, for We'll Never Meet Again, where one character has to depart and he has the wherewithal to do that, right? Like for real. So in the story it is, right? I'm not saying historically that happened at that battle, but I know for a fact that people can and will say and do things like that when they expire if they're prepared to do so. And again, there's a sort of horror in that too, right? Like that darkness, not a silver lining, a darker lining. And that's the aesthetic of Old Moon, right? That miasma, that something that these authors are touching upon, and the genre speaks to them. It answers all the questions from previous, right? Where we'll go, we'll seek out more authors like that. What we'll do, well, I can't bring back the greats. We can't compete with them, but we can try to find equal things to entertain you. And that's really what we're seeking to do. But that also means when you're submitting, these are the eyes you'd be submitting them to, and Graham's, or Graham's. And so I think we're fair and reasonable, amenable to stuff, but we are the team for the time being. And so we are who you would be submitting to. So we're welcome to it, right? In the coming future.
Indeed. My favorite films are not necessarily going to help you if you submit to Old Moon. My favorite film is The Big Lebowski, and that's not very much like that's not really what we publish. I also really like the film The Northman. That's a little bit more like what we publish. And in particular, I really like a scene from The Northman when I like the very ending when spoiler alert, the Northman dies. And he either imagines himself, or I suppose perhaps is taken by a Valkyrie across the Rainbow Bridge into Valhalla. Really cool image. And also the other part where he has a Valkyrie, he imagines a Valkyrie is rescuing him from being held in bondage at one point, and she's on her horse flying through the air, and it just close ups on her face, and she's screaming at the camera, and you can see that her teeth are graven with little etchings, which is something that they found on certain Scandinavian corpses from the remains rather from the Viking era. So that might help you a little bit more, capturing that vibe, that sort of vibe of somebody who is
Okay.
Oh no, it's totally fine, totally fine. But we don't have children yet, but my dogs have been trying to burst into the door for a while. Indeed. So The Northman. So I really like the film The Northman, like the film Big Lebowski. That one's less helpful. My favorite literature. So my favorite book is probably Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. He has some short stories that I really like as well. Probably more like novellas. Tracking Song, which you can find in The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, which is a really fun collection by him. And I believe he has a short story in the Sword and Sorcery anthology, Swords and Dark Magic, from around 2010 or 2013 or something like that, edited by Jonathan Strahan and Lou Anders. It's called Bloodsport, an excellent anthology in general, and a really excellent Sword and Sorcery short story by Gene Wolfe about gladiators in a sort of fighting in almost like a human chess-based gladiatorial contest. It's not really about the gladiatorial contest itself, but that's kind of the background of the story. Very cool story, has an awesome ending. Yes, so that's probably one of my favorite Sword and Sorcery short stories. My favorite sort of out of the Sword and Sorcery, the original ones. My favorite would probably be The Shadow Kingdom by Robert E. Howard. Really like that one. I like how the Cull stories were a little bit more focused on the interiority of the character. And that would probably help you if you're trying to send your story to Old Moon. I do like stories that have a little bit more interiority and a little bit more uncertainty to them. Cull is very much more of a fraught character than Conan. He's a little bit less sure of himself. He's a little bit less sure of reality in general. Conan, very much the opposite. He is definitely sure of who he is and what he's going to be doing. Perhaps the concept of whether reality is what it is doesn't really matter to him. He has that very famous quote where he says, "I don't know if there are gods or if there are not. I just know that I live, I love, I burn with life, blah, blah, blah. So I really like Shadow Kingdom. I also really like Michael Shea's Nift the Lean, 1980 World Fantasy Award winner. Incredible sword and sorcery. Very much it is the tale of a thief and his friend, also a thief, and they go through four. At least in the original one, there's a I believe a few other novellas that were released after that. It's four novellas or four long short stories connected into a novel. Each time, Nift and his friend Barnar, kind of like a Foppered Grey Mouser situation, except they're both kind of Foppered. But they go through an adventure into some version of hell and have to steal something or someone. Super cool stories. Michael Shea's prose is amazing. He kind of started off writing Jack Vance style kind of stuff, but really, I think, acquires his own voice basically instantly. And it is quite the voice indeed. In terms of Old Moon, really hard for me to pick. I mean, I think all of our stories are super, super cool, and I like them all. I would say ones that I've read that I'd love to see more like them. Diary of the Wolf in Old Moon 6 by Adam McPhee. That was written in a somewhat like early modern English. I believe he based it on the diary of Samuel Pepys. If Samuel Pepys was a werewolf. I think actually Samuel Pepys shows up in it and is not a werewolf. But if somebody who was more likable than Samuel Pepys was a werewolf and also in 17th century England, it would be written like that. So it's written kind of in the first person in a stylized prose. And it has some interesting ambiguities and weirdnesses to it. That one's not necessarily very sword and sorcery, though it is werewolves, and they do fight soldiers at the end of it. And it is during Solomon Kane times. So I'd say Diary of the Wolf by Adam McPhee. I would say also, where's this right here? I'm trying to remember Laird Barron's story from Old Moon 8. Now I Have the Scent. Also told in the first person. I like stories that are told in the first person. It's not a requirement. Just most of my favorite stories tend to be first person. Now I Have the Scent, told from the perspective of a far future post-apocalyptic war dog who is gained human sentience, named Mantooth. Super cool. Super cool story. I love it. Laird Barron has a whole bunch of stories told in this kind of post-apocalyptic sci-fi, like almost like Sword and Planet style kind of vibe. He calls them his antiquity stories, and so I really like that one that he sold to us very very graciously for Old Moon 8. And I would say if I had to pick a third Old Moon story that I really really like and would love to see more of, I'm trying to think. I really liked, I think also from Old Moon 8. And it's because I have it right in front of me, so I remember it. So it might be just recency bias, but where is it? I'm looking at it right now. Oh yes, Galatine by Alexander Atreya. She wrote a super cool story from the perspective of Gawain's sword. It was really short. It's only 1,000 words, or a little bit over 1,000 words. The sword is narrating everything. I like it a lot. I love talking swords. They have a long history in sword and sorcery. Elric's sword talks. The sword and the broken sword talks. Turin's sword, Gurthang talks to him, and that's the coolest part of that of Tolkien. Is the Children of Húrin. And so I really like talking swords, and I like a talking sword story where the sword is a big part of it, or even the narrator. I think John Foltz also has a story told from the perspective of the sword in his anthology Worlds Beyond Worlds. I can't remember the exact name of the sword. I think it's called like 1,000 drops or 1,000 names of blood, something like that. It's definitely 1,000, and blood is in there somewhere. But it's told from the perspective of an evil warlock sword that gradually becomes less evil as it drinks the blood of the righteous, which I thought was a humorous idea, and he pulls it off well. So I would say those 3 stories. I like all of them. So if you read any story in Old Moon and you're like, hey, this is really cool, I want to write something else like it, then you'll be in good company, and you'll be more likely to get into our pages. I see Caitlin is looking at me. Caitlin, are you trying to determine? Okay, she's not trying to communicate to anything. She's just making eye contact. Yes, but those 3 stories in particular: Diary of the Wolf by Ed McPhee, Old Moon 6; Galatine by Alexander Atreya, Old Moon 8; and Now I Have the Scent by Laird Barron, Old Moon 8 as well. All 3 of those are super cool, and I would love to see more stories like those out in the world, or more stories like that in our inbox.
Well, very cool. Are there any other final comments? I mean, I guess I could respond, I actually there. What was it? Go ahead.
I was going to ask if you had some favorite stories either from Old Moon or elsewhere that you wanted to share.
I have too many probably from elsewhere. I think our tastes decently overlap, Graham. I'd say I really like Gene Wolfe. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings. Those are probably my top 2 authors there, Tolkien and Wolfe. But The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, one of the short stories I like more by him. That is the name of the short story. Don't be confused by the other stories. Bit of it. And I don't know. I really liked that in Old Moon. I really liked that. The Adam McPhee story in issue 6. And I was reminded, actually, when you're talking, there is a From the Point of View of a Sword story in issue 7. E. Catherine Tobler's Stolen by Moonlight, Betrothed by Sun. I think is the one I'm looking at. Anyway, so
you're correct. No, you're correct. I believe that. Okay. Yeah, it had really cool artwork by Mark Jarrell, who's done a lot of artwork for us. He's doing a lot of we have these kind of illuminations, these marginal art that we're going to be putting into the next issues. Mark Jarrell is doing that for us. He did the illustration for E. Catherine Tobler's story. That one was also really cool. Also, it was kind of almost like the sword pining for its old owner. Which I thought was a really cool take on the issue, and probably one of the few what you might think of as almost like pure romance stories. This might sound silly, but we actually get a lot of romance stories in our inbox. I think just because people write a lot of them, and so you kind of just send them out to a lot of places.
Yeah.
And we're usually not the venue for a romance story. But if your story is about how a sword wants to be wielded again to shed the blood of many, that is a way cool that's a more Old Moon style romance that we might be interested in.
Right. Yeah, and this one's in particular was I don't actually know how to say it, a stock type of sword that's just piercing,
S-stock. Yeah, an S-stock.
S-stock, okay. But besides that, I mean, let's see, there's too many. Like I said, I mean, I enjoy a good Conan yarn. I have a quote if you go to the description of my channel that mentions the Mirrors of Tuz and Thune. It's mostly a joke quote, but still a good story. Maybe my favorite by Howard. Big fan. I'm actually probably more of a fan of Clark Ashton Smith. Love his poetry. I love his stories. His Apocalypse of Evil is amazing. So just stuff like that. I mean, as far another one in Old Moon, actually, I think it's in issue 1, the Questing Beasts. I actually mentioned it in a class once. We were talking about the Questing Beasts for some reason. I was like, yeah, I actually just read. So it must have been back in 2022. I just read this story in this magazine called The Questing Beasts, and interesting take on it. And I don't remember what class that was, but might have been a class on romanticism or something.
That makes sense.
So romances are cool, the medieval type. Anyways, that type.
I do love a good chivalric romance. I just recently finished reading a translation of Yvain by Hartmann von Aue, which was the German version of Christian de Troyes' Ewain, the Knight of the Lion. And it's I don't want. We've been going for very long, and I know Julian and Caitlin both have, and I presume you as well, both have to go to work in the morning. I also have to work, so I don't want to keep us here for too long. But chivalric romances are super cool, and I really like how they took, speaking of that kind of the spiraling effect of people playing off of each other, and indeed of Peridor and Percival, to bring it back to the original conversation at the beginning of the talk. I really like how in chivalric romance they felt very comfortable taking the works of others and taking the ideas of others and reworking them and adding to them, and never really detracting from the original story, but only adding to it and making it different and making it unique for their own context. And I like being able to have these different versions of these stories, and I feel like I don't lose anything by having Chrétien de Troyes' Iwain and Hartmann's Yvain. Both of them feel super cool to me, and they both feel very different. Yvain's is almost, it gets like almost philosophical at times, in the way that he has the characters debate with each other in a way that de Troyes that doesn't necessarily do. But it's very fun for me to have these two different versions of them, and I hope that some of that comes across in Old Moon as well. I hope that we have people feel like they're reading things that, like Julian said, that add to what some of the great authors of the past have done, and don't necessarily try to replace them or somehow better them in some way, but just add to the greater canon of what they've done.
Yeah, no, I like that. Canon is the word there, I think, especially when you talk about earlier works. I mean, like Troilus and Cressida, I mean, right, there's several versions of that. Or I recently read the Saga of the Volsungs, which pulls straight lines from the Diedrich Saga, I think it is. All right.
It's interesting. I was also just recently Diedrich Saga, the Scandinavian compilation of Germanic legends, right? Of like of continental. I say Germanic, I mean like continental, like northern German sort of like, knightly romance. Both a very interesting concept of like somebody making an anthology, obviously fairly common, somebody making an anthology back in the day, and also doing it by what we think of like perhaps Vikings, but at this point just high medieval Scandinavians, taking legends from all over mainland Europe and I guess in this case probably Saxon speaking northern Germans, and translating it into their own into Scandinavian, I suppose probably Norwegian or Danish, I can't quite recall. But I'll be wrong now, and it was Swedish, or maybe they weren't
probably not Swedish.
Maybe they weren't differentiated at this point. Maybe it was all some kind of like some sort of like Middle Norse or whatever, some putative language that I don't speak. But regardless, Diedrich Saga was super cool. And I'm amused that you mentioned it. You read it recently, you said, because I also was reading it recently, and so just enjoy the connection there. That's fun for me.
Yeah, and you get like interconnecting things anyways. Even the Saga of the Volsungs, I would say even more so with the Nibelungenlied as far as Middle High German is concerned.
Yeah.
And I think it's the differences almost that makes them fun to study. I mean, whether it's language or just literature point of view. That's the nice thing about philology, is it's both. It's language and literature, because it's language in context of literature, which is
I was surprised at how different the marriage of Brynhild and Gunther was. I thought it was very different in Diedrich Saga than it was in the Nibelungenlied that I'd read. Because in the Nibelungenlied, it felt almost more sanitized and kind of less violent, and less deceptive. Where in Diedrich Saga, it is just straight up like they're being very cruel and mean to Brynhild, to get her to marry Gunther, if I recall correctly. And the other thing in Diedrich Saga, they have so many characters named Siegfried, or I guess Sigurd, that it was somewhat hard for me to, and maybe it was just a translation that I was reading, but because they had several Sigurds before you get to the Sigurd who becomes like Diedrich's buddy. And I was slightly confused by that. I will admit, I was like, and this might be a product of me reading it before I go to bed, but I was like, there's so many of them. Some of them are giants, some of them aren't. Some of them are raised by giants, but aren't giants themselves. Some of them seem to become giants later on. Very confusing. And I just kind of wish that they had chosen different names for some of these characters. But I understand that it's a part of the compilation of the legend, and perhaps
right.
And anyways,
I don't know. We could probably talk about it after I click stop recording. But it's the same thing, a similar thing in like Saga of the Volsungs. There's a bunch of Sig names, which is an association with Odin, right? Because he has Sig names as well, right? But then also you see like the difference is like Sigurd's the Dragon Slayer, Siegfried's the Dragon Slayer. It's actually Sigmund and Beowulf, which is probably the earliest attestation well, it almost certainly is. So Sigmund is probably the original, or maybe not the original, but one of the earlier ones. Maybe coming from some Proto-Indo-European thing, actually, right? So I mean, like, and you get all this like mixing, or like one thing I really like about Wolfram's Parzival, right, is the difference in like what's the question he asks the Fisher King. It's like, Uncle, what ailest thou? Right, rather than whatever else, that's the best one. Anyways, I could talk too much. Another thing I really like, though, since we were talking about that earlier, is the Northman. Since you mentioned it, Graham, actually, when I give the very short spiel about my novella that I released last year, I'm like, oh, it's like Ghost in Shell meets the Northman, and then almost everyone I tell that they've watched neither. So it doesn't help. So like,
how have you watched neither? Who are these people?
Well, that's a good question. So people I talk to at conventions and stuff, and I don't know what's wrong with them.
I feel like people at conventions have a higher likelihood of having watched at least Ghost in the Shell. Maybe not. I mean, the Northman's more recent though. I don't know. Anyways,
well, 2022. I actually watched the Northman twice in theaters, which is the only time I've ever done that with a movie. So
it's worthy of it.
Yes,
I agree.
So, anyways, I've had you on for this is actually like an hour 45, probably. I think it's 10 minutes off. So, too long? No, a great amount of time. I don't want to take any more from you, but thank you for coming on, everyone. I'll put your website in the description. I'll put the backer kit thing in the description. Backer kit campaign is going on now when this releases. And I believe, is it after your campaign you're planning to open for submissions? Is that?
Yep, the date. So our campaign ends on July 6th at I think like 11:59 p.m. EST, and then on July 7th we'll be open for submissions for a month until August 7th.
Yep.
And then I think we'll probably have 2 submission windows, one for the Arthurian issue, and then one for our more general sort of sword, sorcery, and dark fantasy issue. So the Arthurian issue submission window will be first.
Cool. Well, very exciting. I hope everyone who watches this checks you guys out. So thanks for coming on again, Julian and Graeme. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us, Liam.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Graeme. Good night.
Good night.
Peace.